Hello, hi, welcome. We are officially halfway through this year, which is completely unreal. I don't know about the rest of you, but I have truly just lost all sense of time at this point. Months just keep passing by and I don't even realize it. It's probably not a good thing. But since we have reached the halfway point of the year, it is officially time for me to share with you all the books that I have read in this first half of the year and give you kind of a rundown on them, my thoughts on all of them, and the best way to do that is with the mid-year book freakout tag. I've done this multiple times. This will probably be my fourth or fifth time doing this video, but I love this book tag because I just think it's a great way to give a comprehensive review of a lot of the books you've read throughout the year, and I enjoy all the questions, so yeah, that's what we're going to be doing today. I will leave a link to the original creators video in the description box below so you can go check theirs out, as well as mine from last year. I think I did one last year, maybe I didn't, I don't know, but if I did, it'll be linked down below. So my reading goal for the year on Goodreads and Storygraph, which again, those will also be linked down below if you want to follow me there to know everything I've read. But for my reading goals, I set them at one book because I like to use my reading goal as just like a tracker for how many books I read and not like an actual goal of a set number of books that I have to read in the year, because then I feel like I get too competitive with myself and I don't want reading to feel like a competition. I just want it to be enjoyable. So for the past couple of years at least, I think I have been setting my reading goal at one book and it's been working so well for me. I'm really enjoying it, and this year so far I have read 59 books and I'm in the middle of my 60th book, which is so good because last year I think I read 20 something books, like maybe 26 max. The year before that I think I read 8 or 9 books and that was it. And so to have read almost 60 books this year already, halfway through the year, I'm feeling great. I feel like my old reading self again, and I'm having a good time and enjoying the majority of what I'm reading. I have also read some really terrible books this year for the experiment videos that I've done, but that's a different story. But yeah, of those 59 books, we're gonna go over some of my favorites, my least favorites, the most disappointing, surprising, the best covers, everything like that. So without any further ado, let's get into all the questions. Question number one is, what is the best book you've read so far this year? Before we get into my actual number one best, we're gonna go through a few that I just really loved that I want to mention that I'm afraid I won't get to mention later on in the video. We're gonna go through these kind of rapid fire, but the first one that I have is 5 centimeters per second. I loved this manga, highly recommend. Next, I've talked about this a lot, but I adored Convenience Store Woman by Sayaka Murata. This was such a short, fantastic read, definitely worth picking up. More translated Japanese fiction that I loved is Before the Coffee Gets Cold by Toshikazu Kawaguchi. This is a very short book about a coffee shop that allows you to time travel. It's beautiful. I adored it. Next up, we have some more manga. Of course, I have to mention Yona of the Dawn. I have been obsessed with this series since the start of the year, and it is what jump-started my reading for the year, so absolutely one of my favorite things I've read this year. Again, more manga, and a recent favorite, but definitely an all-time favorite now, is Spy Family. I am obsessed with this series. I adore it so deeply. Of course, it cannot be a 2022 favorites list without me mentioning Heartstopper, because I read this earlier this year before the show came out to prepare for the show, watched the show, adored that too, but this series is just a new all-time favorite too, so yes, I love Heartstopper. If you still haven't read it, you really should. Next up, we have Let Us Believe in the Beginning of the Cold Season by Furu Farrokhzad. This is a collection of poetry, my favorite collection of poetry I have ever read, now just one of my favorite books ever. I adored this. Highly recommend if you want poetry to read. Next up, I have The Picture of Dorian Gray, absolutely a new favorite classic and something I will definitely be rereading. And lastly, another book that completely tore me apart but is also just, I think, one of the best things I've ever read, and that is My Dark Vanessa by Kate Elizabeth Russell. Definitely look up content warnings if you choose to read this. It's not something that's easy to read. It's not meant to be easy to read, but it is honestly not my favorite book I've ever read, but I said this in the video where I did the vlog for it too. It is, I think, one of the best things I've ever read, even though it was miserable to actually read. See, a lot of people think that I only read things or that I just love hating on things, but I also really do love books. That's literally why I'm here. Okay, so now we get into my number one favorite book I've read so far this year. I know I gave you a whole list of favorites, but I just wanted to mention all of them because I love all of them and I recommend all of them completely because they're so good. But now finally onto my absolute favorite book I've read so far this year, a book that I feel just truly understood me as a reader and was perfect in every way in terms of what I like in books, and that is absolutely Sorcery of Thorns by Margaret Rogerson. I am obsessed with this. This book is Howl's Moving Castle and Studio Ghibli in book form. And I know Howl's Moving Castle is a book, but no, this feels like the Studio Ghibli film in the best way ever. It is just immaculate perfection. Everything I could have ever wanted. It's one of my new favorite books of all time. I am in love. If I were to give someone a list of books that I would describe as Hannah books, books that perfectly encapsulate my taste, this would be on that list. This with like The Night Circus and The Starless Sea and, you know, like all my other favorites, this would be on that list. This understood me in a way where I feel like it was written for me. It's just so good and it made me so happy, and I literally, as I was reading it, was going back and rereading parts of it because that's how immersed I was and that's how much I just didn't want it to end. I couldn't stand the fact that the book was going to end. I wanted to live in this forever. This is peak YA fantasy, an incredible romance, bisexual representation. It's everything I could want in one book. If you want something with Studio Ghibli vibes, if you want something with Howl's Moving Castle vibes, if you have similar taste to me and you like similar books, if you like books and books about libraries and the power of stories, this is it. This will give you all of that and so much more. Great characters, wonderful character development, demons and magicians and just magical libraries. It's just pure magic, pure perfection. I loved it. I am so glad I read this. 5 out of 5 stars. My favorite book of the year so far. I don't know what will top this, but I have a few books that I'm planning to read this year that potentially could, and I'm excited about that because I loved this so much. If something else this year can top it too, that would be amazing because all I want to do right now is read incredible books. All right, now before we get into the second question, I added in my own question, so this is like question 1.5, because there's no question for the worst book that you read this year, and if you know me, you know I love complaining about terrible books that I've read. So question 1.5, the worst book I've read so far this year. Before we get into my number one, I have 2 honorable mentions, and those easily have to go to first, Slammed by Colleen Hoover. I despised this book, absolutely despised it. If you watched my I read 5 books, I said I'd never read video, then you saw my review of this. If you want to see my review of it in detail, I will link that on the screen so you can go and watch it. This was the first Colleen Hoover book I've ever read, and it will actually not be my last. Spoilers. But I hated it. This book is about a teacher-student relationship that is set in high school. I don't think I need to explain why I think that that's terrible. Again, if you want a more detailed review, I have a solid, like, I don't know, 15 minutes of myself just ranting about how much I hated this. You can go and watch it there. The next honorable mention goes to The Spanish Love Deception. Again, if you've watched my Reading 5 romance books video, you know how I feel about The Spanish Love Deception. I never in my life will recover from the line, "I want to feel you milking me, baby." It still makes me laugh hysterically, and I will just fundamentally never understand how this got so popular because there is so much incredible romance, and in my opinion, this is not it. And then lastly, of course, the worst book I have read this year, potentially the worst book I have ever read, is From Blood and Ash by Jennifer L. Armentrout. This was atrocious. I don't have another word for it. Again, if you watched the I read 5 books I said I'd never read video, then you know I ranted about this for so long because I hated it so much. Apart from the fact that there were incredibly problematic aspects of this book, like the fact that 2 of the characters are named after the color of their skin and they're the only people of color in that entire book, as well as being magically bonded servants to the white characters in the book. Really questionable consent throughout the entire thing, like from beginning to end. Very strange language about veiling and unveiling and being freed from having to veil and cover yourself up. Just heaps of misogyny. The whole premise of the plot being based on the fact that she was a virgin and losing your virginity changes you. Putting all of that aside, this is the worst written thing I think I've ever read in my entire life. Multiple people in the comments of that video told me that this book actually didn't have an editor, which makes perfect sense because it's not edited. It feels like a rough draft, like a rough draft. It is unnecessarily and disturbingly long, just for no reason. The actual writing and like dialogue and everything and descriptions, the info dumping, just so bad. There was no plot, there was no character development, and there's just so much more that is even worse. So if you want to hear all of my in-depth, detailed thoughts, you can go and watch the video. But yeah, easily worst book I've read this year. I do not think anything can top it, unless I were to read the sequels. I'm not doing that. But yeah, if you've been thinking about reading this, do what you want to do, but in my opinion, save yourself. Truly just save yourself. Question 2 is the best sequel you've read so far this year. And as I was putting this list together, I realized I really haven't read many sequels. Like I've read either complete series or I'm in the middle of some series, but I didn't like pick up the sequel to a book where like the first one came out a couple years ago and I just started the next one or something like that. So yeah, I didn't really know what to do with this question, but I guess since I have read some like graphic novel and manga series, I can go go with like the sequels for those series. So I would definitely say my favorite sequels have been the sequels to Heartstopper and Spy Family, because these have been like my two favorite series I've been reading. These are both the first volumes of each, but the sequels for these I have loved, particularly volumes 3 and 4 for Heartstopper I absolutely adored. And with Spy Family, I love every volume equally. They're just so good, and this series just progressively gets better and better. So I'm excited to finish this, and I'm excited for the final volume of this to come out, I think next year. Question 3 is a new release you haven't read yet but want to. For me, that easily goes to All My Rage by Sabaa Tahir. Sabaa Tahir is one of my favorite authors of all time. The Ember and the Ashes series is one of my favorite YA series and just series of all time. When I found out about her contemporary release, I bought it immediately, and I just still haven't picked it up yet, and I really need to. I just know I'm gonna love this. I know it's gonna be emotional and probably kind of difficult to read, but I love that in a good contemporary, so yeah, I'm very excited about this one. Question 4 is your most anticipated release for the second half of the year. So I definitely have a few, and I feel like I'm probably forgetting some on this list as well, but to name a few, one of the top ones for sure is Carrie Soto is Back by Taylor Jenkins Reid. As you all know, I have loved Taylor Jenkins Reid's books for years. She's one of my all-time favorite authors. I will read anything she writes and buy anything she writes immediately. So I'm so excited for this to come out. I think it comes out in August. Another book that I'm incredibly excited about is called The Ones We Burn. I heard about this recently. From what I know, this is a YA fantasy. I'm pretty sure that it's also sapphic, like there's a sapphic romance in it. And the reason I want to read this is because I saw the author describing it as having like a Zuko in book 2 of Avatar: The Last Airbender in the Crossroads of Destiny episode, like that kind of betrayal and that kind of redemption eventually that Zuko gets. I saw them describing the book as having like that kind of an element to it inspired by Zuko, and I was like, sold immediately. I need it. And also that the romance is kind of like Catradora from She-Ra, and I love She-Ra, so like that just completely sold me. I heard that and I was like, I need this book. I need to read it right now. And then probably my number one most anticipated book for the remainder of the year has to go to Babel by R.F. Kuang. I am also very grateful that I have an advanced copy of this already, so I can read this whenever I want now. I am so excited about this. This book sounds incredible. From what I understand, it's basically set in a fictionalized version of Oxford in the 1800s, and it is about the influence of colonialism and imperialism on academia, and there's somehow magic involved and a revolution, and the full title is Babel, or the Necessity of Violence, an Arcane History of the Oxford Translators' Revolution, which is just an incredible title, first of all. I just think that this is going to be an incredible read. I can't wait to read it, and I have a feeling I'm really going to love this. Question 5 is your biggest disappointment. So for me, for this one, I have 3. First up is You've Reached Sam by Dustin Tao. I thought I would really like this, and I think overall I gave this 3 stars. Most of these books I think I gave around 3 stars. I thought I would really like it, but overall, in my opinion, it was just deeply okay. It wasn't as emotional as I think I was expecting it to be, and so for me, it just felt a bit flat. Next up is One Last Stop by Casey McQuiston. This was a book that I was definitely anticipating. I was excited to read because I loved Red, White, and Royal Blue. However, again, this one felt a little bit flat to me in terms of like the characters and their development. It just wasn't my favorite. I think, again, I gave this one 3 stars. It was okay, and I wouldn't not recommend it. I just didn't particularly like it as much as I thought I would. And then lastly, we have The Idiot by Eilif Batuman. I thought that I was going to like this, and then I read it, and it is one of the most boring things I've ever read in my life. And I understand why people like it, like I get it, but for me personally, it's just not my thing, and so I was unfortunately incredibly disappointed after reading this. This one I think I gave 2 stars, maybe even less, I don't know, but that's just purely based on my enjoyment. I don't think it's like a bad book necessarily, I just think that it's too long and also not really for me, which is fine, but I was unfortunately disappointed because I did think I'd like it. The next question is your biggest surprise. I have 2 for this, and one of them is one I already mentioned, and that's definitely My Dark Vanessa by Kate Elizabeth Russell. Like I mentioned before, I really loved this, and I really didn't think I was gonna like it that much. I didn't think I'd hate it, but I just didn't think I'd care, and I ended up just, honestly, like I said, I think this is one of the best things I've ever read. Again, it really hurt. It was really hard to read. It's really disturbing, and I think that it is something you should definitely look into before you choose to read it, because it's really graphic and really triggering if you have experienced anything in it. Even if you haven't experienced anything in it, it's hard to read. But if it is something you think you can handle, I think it deals with the subject matter gracefully and empathetically, and I really appreciate the discussion that this book has. It's about this 15-year-old girl who's in a relationship with her 42-year-old professor. It's really hard to read. It's really disgusting a lot of the time. And it's about that trauma. So just know that if you choose to read it. But again, I was just completely surprised by how much I liked this. I think after reading A Little Life and having that book just like traumatized me, honestly, in a lot of ways. I was really hesitant about reading anything else that dealt with really difficult subject matters like this. But then after reading this, I truly realized what sets something like this apart from a book like A Little Life for me. And it's the way that the book deals with the subjects that it's talking about. You can feel the message the author was trying to send without her having to explicitly tell it to you. And you can feel that the book was written from a place of true empathy and understanding. And it has become one of my favorite things I've read. And then second, probably the biggest surprise of the year for me easily has to go to Conversations with Friends by Sally Rooney. If you watched my I Read 5 Sad Books video, you know how I feel about normal people. And if you watched my I Read 5 Books to Try and Become That Girl video, then you know how I feel about Conversations with Friends. And that is like the polar opposite of how I felt about normal people. And in my opinion, Conversations with Friends is truly just a better normal people. I feel like she wrote this and then tried to follow this up with normal people by writing almost exactly the same story except making it more boring. And in my opinion, this book does everything that normal people wants to do, except it just does it better. I will say, however, I have since watched the show for Normal People and started watching the show for Conversations with Friends, which I quite literally couldn't finish because it was that bad in my opinion. I think that the show for Normal People is much better than the book. I still don't really like the show very much because I don't like the story of Normal People all that much, but I do think that the show is better than the book, and I think that that book translates really well into a show. However, Conversations with Friends, the TV show, is just garbage. I hated it. I only got through like 5 episodes, I think, and I just couldn't keep going. But the book is so much better. If I were to rank the TV shows and the books for the Sally Rooney universe, it would go the Conversations with Friends book, leagues above everything else. Normal People, the show, like here as like a mid-tier, it's an okay show type of thing. Normal People, the book, below that in like a this isn't really that good category. And then Beautiful World, Where Are You? Sally Rooney's other book, which I also did not like at all, below Normal People. It wasn't good in my opinion. And then the Conversations with Friends show. Just don't watch the show, read the book. The book is actually good in my opinion. So yeah, if you want my recommendation on Sally Rooney books, the one and only one I would recommend is this one. I wouldn't recommend the other two personally. I just don't think they're that great. Question 7 is your favorite new author. It can be either a debut author or an author who's new to you. For this one, I decided to go with a debut author, or at least their debut book, and an author who was also new to me, and that is Ava Reid, the author of The Wolf and the Woodsman. I read this a couple of weeks ago and I really, really liked it. And in particular, I think the thing I like the most is the writing style. This is a fantasy book that's inspired by Hungarian history and Jewish mythology. It also has kind of like a romance aspect to it, which has a bit of like an enemies to lovers dynamic to it too. And I just thoroughly enjoyed this. The author easily became like an auto-buy author for me. I'm really excited for Juniper and Thorn, their next book, which comes out in, I think, June. So like now, maybe it's already out by the time I'm making this video. This is another book that I feel like I was a bit surprised by because I didn't really know much about it. I just seen a couple of people recommending it. I was intrigued by the cover and the synopsis, so I was like, I'll try it out. And I'm really glad I did. I very, very much enjoyed it, and I'm excited to read her next books as well. Question 8 is your newest fictional crush, and question 9 is your newest favorite character. So I'm gonna kind of combine these questions because I don't really have a newest fictional crush, so I'm gonna kind of make it like fictional couples, but those like characters in the fictional couples are also like my new favorite characters, so it's just gonna be all one question and we're gonna list off some of my favorite characters from the year. First up, I have Nick and Charlie. I love the two of them, of course, like everyone else, as well as all of the other Heartstopper characters. I love Elle and Tao as well. They're so near and dear to me, especially in the show. I loved how we got more of them. Nathaniel and Elizabeth from Sorcery of Thorns are also two of my new favorite characters, easily. I'm in love with them. They're both such great characters, and Nathaniel definitely has very strong Howl vibes, so obviously I'm going to love him. Hawk and Yona from Yona of the Dawn, of course, because they're great. I love Yona as the main character of that series, and Hawk is such a great love interest. He's so broody and can be so annoying, but it's also so much fun. And of course, Yor and Lloyd and Anya from Spy Family. Just the whole Forger family, I love them. They're so precious and so good and so cute. I could read about them forever. Question number 10 is a book that made you cry. I had to think about this for a bit because I don't know if anything like made me cry, but these definitely did make me tear up. At least I shed at least a couple of tears, but I don't think I sobbed reading anything this year so far. But that's volumes 3 and 4 of Heartstopper. This, it hurts so good. If you haven't read Heartstopper yet and you've only watched the show, so you only really know what happens in volumes 1 and 2, I definitely recommend looking up the trigger warnings and content warnings for volumes 3 and 4, because these two volumes deal a lot more with like mental health and particularly eating disorders. So for me, on like a very personal level, I really related to a lot of what this story covered, and it definitely did make me tear up. It was very emotional, but like not bad emotional, very good emotional in a way where I felt seen, and it was just so nice. So yes, these would be the only ones this year that have really made my eyes water and have made me shed a couple tears. Question 11 is a book that made you happy, and I know I keep talking about Heartstopper, but it's just because they're applicable to like a lot of these questions, but that's easily Heartstopper again. These books make me happy unlike anything else. I can't pick something else for this answer. Spy Family is also pretty close. That also makes me really happy, but nothing makes me as happy as Heartstopper has made me. Question 12 is the most beautiful book you've bought or received this year, and for me this is easily the Waterstones exclusive edition of Chain of Iron by Cassandra Clare. I have been on the hunt for this for so long, and when I found it for a very reasonable price, I immediately knew I had to get it because it's so pretty and so beautiful, and I'm so glad that I finally have it. Now I just need to find Chain of Gold and definitely pre-order Chain of Thorns when that comes out so I can complete my collection. Alright, and then lastly, question 13 is a book you need to read before the end of the year. And I have plenty, like a lot, that I really need to read before the end of the year, but currently the one that's kind of at the top of my list, my main priority, is Alone with You in the Ether by Olivia Blake. I bought this months ago, I started reading it months ago, and then I put it down because I got busy, and then a couple weeks ago Olivia Blake announced that she's traditionally publishing this one, so now the self-published version has disappeared, and this book blew up online. Like a lot's happened in between that time, and so now I keep seeing people hype this up, so I'm really worried about reading it now. I'm worried I'm not gonna like it, but I have a feeling, a really strong feeling that I will like it because I bought it on a whim for a reason. So yeah, I really want to read this because I just really want to know what I think about it. So I'm excited to finally, hopefully, get around to it. But there you all have it. That is it for the mid-year book freakout tag and the best and worst books I have read so far this year and everything in between. I hope you all enjoyed watching this video. Let me know in the comments down below what is the best and worst book you have read so far this year, and what is the book that you are most anticipating reading in the second half of the year. If you'd like to follow me on any of my social media, all of my links are in the description box as always. But thank you all so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!